Hello, my name is Laura B. and I'm with the College of the Melissae Center for Sacred Beekeeping. And this video is going to give you an introduction to our methodologies, perspectives, and goals in what we're calling an evolution in beekeeping. The way we study bees is from what we're calling a sixfold sacred path. This is where we try to learn as much as we can about science, sacred, history, mystery, art, medicine, and activism of the world and culture of the bee. We believe that starting with a good scientific foundation is really important so that we can really get a grounded language in how we can understand the bee. And so we study traditional beekeeping, bee biology and ecology, Gaia theory, saying that Gaia is an organism and we are a part of that organism. Symbiosis theory, how do we live within and with other animals in and on Gaia. We focus on a bee-centric methodology, so we're always reviewing methodologies through that lens. We discuss realistically the risk factors, both of apiculture and agriculture, as well as what's going on in our communities. And we're always looking and trying to learn as much as we can about bee diseases and genetic solution to this sort of bottlenecking genetic that we see happening in the Western beekeeping world today. We also are interested in learning about the sacred around the bee. And what is sacred mean in this context? Well, sacred is sort of an ineffable word. And as I was coming up with our own description, I came up with this phrase that sacred is that which must not be violated. And what is sacred? Well, if you follow the science, you can find the sacred. When you study the bee, you get up against the edge of science and into the mystery, and the questions just become this incredible, complex viewpoint, and it's just, there's an endless possibility of ways that they can teach us, and this is so vital and beautiful. It must not be violated. The many aspects of the bee, as you begin to really delve into the study of the bee, you will find many aspects of the bee that lead us to divine order. And a lot of these things that lead us to divine order are simply scientifically uncovered as you study the bee. Every person comes to that feeling of sacred energy with the bee in their own way. And I just ask of you to remain open to the experience, because it most likely will come through a dawning awareness or something, a sensation in one's body that really alerts us to a deeper connection and truth to what is bigger than just human. As we began to uncover and look toward history, I realized that the study of the sacred bee is vast. It goes back to Neolithic times in nearly every culture around the world, and almost all the continents that I've been able to figure out have some sort of honey gathering insect of the bee stripe that has some amazing spiritual, cultural, mythological, or symbolic resonance around the world. And when we're studying the history, we're not only studying that, we're studying technology and practices throughout the world, ways people thought about bees. What was the bee culture like? And as we're doing that, we discover herstory. For beekeeping started pre-patriarchy and has a whole different set of symbols and myths within that. And the language of those symbols are very often pointing to a divine feminine story. That's where we look at myth and living symbols. And these are symbols that are sometimes still important today. And some of this information can be followed backward through the little threads of old wives' tales that you can sometimes hear when you're talking with old beekeepers. And I'm not sure if people knew this, but bees in history are given credit for being the origin of medicine and medicine learning throughout the world. And here's an example. This story that goes along with this symbol, which I'm sure you recognize, You'll recognize it from ancient Egyptian tombs or King Tut or some kind of jewelry, and you know what this symbol is. It represents an Egyptian protection symbol. It originated as the Eye of Ra. The eye itself was a gift from his sister because one day Ra had a terrible argument and his brother plucked out his eye. So his sister, being compassionate, gave him her eye and put it in his head. So he became gifted with the vision of seeing both masculine and feminine ways. And this eye is what's given him, Ra, the ability to be a great protector and healer. And he was so grateful that he cried a tear that is represented by that spiral swoop, and that tear fell on the sand of Egypt and created the first honeybees. That eye for healing was started as a symbol at the beginning of a prescription. So you would write that symbol to say, "Oh, Ra, please protect us and strengthen this prescription and medicine so that my patient will be healed." Well, over the centuries, we still use that symbol today as a symbol for pharmacy. So we can see that the bee, we'll find repeatedly through the study of the bee, that these symbols are alive even 3,000 years or longer after they were first introduced into the cultural lexicon. I think the mystery aspect of sacred beekeeping is what really draws a lot of people to sacred beekeeping. It's my belief that people are really wanting to serve nature, get to know nature, give nature something of themselves, and come into beekeeping seeking that. They may be drawn to the bees from inspiration and meditation, but once they get into the bees, they certainly will find great mystery and inspiration from working with and meditating with bees. One of the levels that we can receive that mystery is through animal communication. I believe that animal communication is a birthright. It's an internal inner knowing. And it's something that we could do natively if it was a muscle we practiced. And I believe it's easy to come back into that space once you can find a few touchstones. A good person to follow is Anna Breitenbach, and I believe that we use sort of a similar style when we're working with the bees. Of course, it's different for each individual, and every person has their own way of finding this out. But we're trying to really create this as a place to do that kind of exploration. Also, something even a little bit different, but perhaps similar to Anna's work, is some work by a man named Stephen Harding talking about animal encounter. And this is where, when you really relate to animals, you can perceive something that's more than human, that sometimes has species implications in the communication. And these are some of the things that we're exploring and influence our thoughts and work around and with bees. People sometimes say, why is art and medicine together? Well, I think it starts with art, and I think art is medicine, and I think that medicine is art. And so I couldn't really say that there was an end point in this rainbow of the offerings of the hive. Art itself, in general, is just a way of thinking that sometimes can be really considered. I think is drawing from the right-sided brain and very intuitively led. And the bees certainly offer that in many ways, which we'll be talking about later and in other parts of our online intensive series. But let's just start, if we can just start with that. Say that one of the things that has been very influenced by the bee is music. In fact, some of the first goddesses on the planet that were considered bee goddesses gave the gift of music to the people. Also, dance is very influenced by the bee as the bees dance and make patterns. The waggle dance is an essential element of their conversation. And so it's really wonderful to work with that in an embodied sense as inspired by the bee. Of course, poetry throughout the ages Bee people have been considered gifted with the gift of the honey tongue, and poetry is one gift that many beekeepers find as medicine from the hive and art from the hive, as well as prayer. And we mentioned inspiration. In fact, the ancient Greek thought of this as an actual product of the bee, that they would bring inspiration down from the heavens and place it in the flower so that all of the people on earth could find poetry and inspiration in those blossoms. One of the things that we call medicine from bees is apitherapy. And so I would consider all of these things and aspects of apitherapy. However, many people first think of venom. Apitherapy is actually defined as the basic ingredients that physically come from a hive, and it starts with what we mostly know of venom. Venom is really great for things like arthritis, and people practice sting therapy all over the world. In fact, the oldest known practice is Hushindu in Japan, and their self-described story is that were taught by the bees 10,000 years ago. Honey is a hive product that is very beautiful for healing throats, getting rid of allergies, and so forth. Scent is a new one that's really being uh, looked at in a lot of places, where people take an oxygen mask and hook it to the beehive and breathe that delicious scent of the interior of the hive box. There's also the pollen and sound, which we'll talk about in one of these online series. Propolis, which is resin from trees. Honeymead, which is where we get the term honeymoon, and was actually something of a social medicine, where the priestesses would bring people through rituals with the gift of honeymead to help relax them as they're teaching them the new things that they want them to learn from the rituals. Also, this is what we give young lovers to make the post-wedding jitters go away as they go on their honeymoon. They get a jug of honey mead. Then there's plant knowledge, and this is where all of the colleges that say that they got their information from the bees, a lot of them are very focused around plant knowledge. And then, of course, there's the often described gift of shamanic and psychopomp energies from the beehive that has been talked about since incredibly ancient times. And once we feel all these things and learn all these things and embody all these things and witness the miracle of what bees are, then we are driven toward activism. And this is as important, if not more important, than any of the parts or even all of the parts put together. Because that which we love, we protect, and we need to protect bees and all pollinator species right now for all the obvious reasons. Bees are a great symbol for activism because they are guidelines for what is needed for our environment. I often think about making a bracelet that said WWBD, what would bees do? And I think that could help us make a lot of decisions. Bees are also a model for community building because they work together as one superorganism of 60,000 parts. Before we go any further, let's just talk about a few cool bee facts. And the reason why I include some of these things is because when we're in the College of Melissa, we kind of even expand these cool bee facts and look at them even from a different angle or maybe in a more expanded view. So let's look at a few. Let's start with the queen bee. Up on the upper left corner is a queen cell. This is how a hive will start. They will create a queen cell, put an egg in there, let that egg mature, and in the center photo on the top, you see that she is emerging from her queen cell. She will spend a couple days practicing warming up her wings and getting some food and maybe doing a practice flight, and then she'll go out and find a drone congregation area where about 20,000 drones are hanging out, and she'll fly above them. As you see in the picture on the bottom left, the drone will find her, mount her, and give her his phallus as he plummets to the ground and complete in his life mission. As she does this 20 times, each time she's going into her mating flight, which is once or maybe twice in a lifetime, and then she returns home, which is what you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner. She's going home. You can see her abdomen is nice and extended, and hanging out of her um, hind end is a little bit of the last drone that was lucky enough to mate her on the wing. The worker bees will attend to her, clean that up, and help her get laying. And that's what you see in the picture below. The bees are nurse bees taking care of her, making sure she's all clean and shiny. And that's why she looks all bald and shiny, is because the bees love her so much, they rubbed off all her hair. Bees can smell an apple tree at a mile and a half away. Drone bees have an even better sense of smell. The way we know this is because the worker bee on the left has 12 flanges on her antenna, which is like her taste bud that tastes air. And the drone bee on the right has 13 on his little antenna. You can also see a difference in their large eyes. They both have compound eyes. I know that the worker bee has 6,000 hexagonal lenses on each of her eyes and can therefore see through 12,000 lenses when she's flying around. Down below, the center two pictures show what it might look like to look at an object with several thousand lenses, by the picture represented by the plain zinnias and then the zinnias with the cut up in hexagons. But I think this is a misleading way to look at it. I think that each hexagon actually sees things more in a kaleidoscope way. And so they're actually seeing 12,000 versions of everything that's around them. Their sight is amazing and the object of much study. The drone bee on the right, I'm not sure if he has more lenses. I definitely need to find out more. But his eyes meet at the top so that he can see the queen bee flying up above him. The surprise I got was I knew that bees had 5 eyes. You can see the very important eye that's used for guiding, which is on the picture on the left. On the center of the top of her head is a little round bead. Well, that's a certain eye that that all Apis mellifera have, and that's used to tell their address within 6 inches, even if they're flying from 3 miles away. They do this by seeing where the sun is on the horizon, apparently. Then they also have another few eyes. On the worker bee, it's 2 extra eyes. These are more simple lenses, like the one in the middle. Together, they're called the ocelli. We, at the college, we call the eye on the top middle the sun eye, and then we talk the 2 extra ones, we call them the secret eyes, which I'll explain in a moment. But when I was looking on this slide, I noticed that the drone bee, we know for a fact it still has the sun eye, and you can see it in the picture on the right. That's a drone bee emerging from his cell. He's just coming out for the first time. That top center eye is his eye, for his sun eye, to see his direction. But I saw that the drone has 4 eyes in the middle there. Those round little pearl, like black pearl looking dots in between his large eyes and above his antenna, those are 4 eyes. So he literally has 7 eyes, and the worker has 5 eyes. So that was news to me, and I need to find out more. And that's the world of beekeeping, folks. You never know everything. The bees are a superorganism, which means that every bee is needed to complete the body of the hive, and to just cut it up or take bees out, split them up, and so forth is actually potentially upsetting a very special balance that the bees have created to procreate themselves and to monitor and grow and forage, all as they see fit within their environment. So a superorganism is a life being made up of many parts. Coral is a superorganism. They all need to live together in order to survive. No one can survive for long without the other. The picture on the left shows lots of different life stages. You can see on the bottom that very yellow bee is actually a brand new bee. You can see that her wings have not yet opened. Her hair is still even smushed from being in the cell, and she's very fuzzy. None of her hair has rubbed off as she's working in the cell and around other bees. Up above, you can see two bees who have a more worn appearance. They are older bees and performing different duties in the hive. As a young bee, they're a nurse bee, and that's one of the first jobs a bee will do when she emerges as an adult from her cell. Going clockwise in a Fibonacci spiral, we'll go next to the bee that is flying with the pollen. That's a job in and of itself. Most important jobs in the hive, as the pollen is the baby food. Next to the right is a bee extruding wax flakes from her abdomen. As you can see, she's extruding 8 flakes of wax. She does that one time a day for 8 days, each bee contributing 64 flakes of wax in their lifetime. Next, in the upper right corner, is a bee drinking water. So if you love bees, go ahead and make a water feature that has moss or something floating, pebbles where water is in between the pebbles, something where the bees can land and use their proboscis to get down into semi-brackish water without fear of falling in. And you will see so many bees, they love it. Below that, I'm not sure if you know this, but Paul Stamets has been working on the concept of bees and mushrooms. It has been discovered that there's not only do they go for wild mushroom spores or something from the mushroom in the wild, they also have a little tiny bit of fungus in their hair that helps to break down those pollen spores. So fungus is very important for bees' life cycle, and fungus gathering and medicine gathering in general is a job for the bees. And so make sure you're not using fungicide around any kinds of plants or soil where bees might be frolicking. Down below in the bottom right-hand corner is a bee that is actually collecting aphid spew. This is called forest honey. It's very prized, very mineral rich, very prized in many parts of the world, and is just chock full of vitamins and whatnot. But what they do is they collect the spew from aphids. Aphids eat the leaves, and they can only process about 10% of what's in what they eat. And so they spew out what they cannot process, which is sugars and water. And the bees come along, collect it just like they're getting nectar from a flower, and put it in their colony, using it for during times of nectar dearth or times when nectar is not available. The next picture to the left of that one is a guard bee. She's taken it upon herself to keep that big bad yellow jacket out. And in case you didn't know, this is the difference between a yellow jacket and a bee. Same size, completely different outfits. I think the one on the left is motorcycle. The one on the right is more moped. Then up above that, you see the bees gathering my favorite hive product in terms of the physical hive products is the bee collecting propolis. Those are cottonwood buds, I believe, and the bee is collecting the sticky sap and putting it on her corbicula, which are her pollen packs on the side, her little baskets where she carries the things she wants to bring home. And that is the medicine of the hive. Bees will use this as an antimicrobial, anti-decay, antibacterial, way of protecting the hive, as well as opening and closing the entrance to make sure that their inside of their hive is regulated very, very carefully. So you may have thought about this, but in context of the way we're looking at the bee today, maybe we'll look at a few of these not necessarily proven, but general ideas about the kind of energy it might take to produce some of those beautiful hive products and things that we've been talking about. Well, it takes about 2 million flowers, the nectar from 2 million flowers, 4,500 miles of flight, which is the same as going from Medford to Peru. Medford is in southern Oregon on the California border. It takes around 556 bees to make 1 pint of honey, which is 1 pound. Each bee in her lifetime will only make 1/12 of a teaspoon of that honey. Now multiply that energy cost by 9 or 10 to estimate the energy needs for wax. Consider that each bee makes 8 flakes a day for only 8 days of her life. And you can see next to that match head how big those little flakes are. The other items that you're seeing in that little picture are 2 little nuggets of pollen, 1 kind of reddish brown nugget of propolis, the bee wing on the left, a little tiny piece of a mite on the lower right, and 3 wax flakes in the middle. And it takes 31,000 flakes to make 1 ounce of wax. Bees come to us in many ways, and there's lots of things we do with bees. One of the things, and my favorite thing to do with bees, and at the time of the filming of this video, I have done it 64 times, is to catch swarms. Swarms are at the most peaceful, loving, babyish state of the hive's existence. Not saying they won't sting you, but they're less likely to sting you. Bees reproduce through that queen mating story that I told you at the beginning of this video, but also through cleaving, by separating the body of the original hive and either taking the elder, a fertile queen, or a younger fertile queen, taking the queen and half of the bees in some of the stores on a flight. They first like to stage their flight, get all together, make sure everybody's there out of the hive, all contained, which is what you're seeing in the picture on the right. And then they move into their forever home, in a tree, in a chimney, in somebody's wall, and so forth. That hive on the right, her name was Devora Sweetlove, and she was 7.5 pounds of bees, if you can believe that. And I thank my mentor, Floyd, for that beautiful swarm. The swarm is very docile, very peaceful. There's a great chance to get to know bees in a more intimate way when you can handle them. One of the things bees love to do is fly super high up in trees. I show this to say that anybody can be a beekeeper. That's my friend Dolly. She's around 80-something years old in this picture, still catching swarms. That was fun. So we like to rescue hives of all stripes. Here's another one. This is actually a hive and not a swarm. This hive decided to build the most gorgeous, luscious, beautiful comb on a tree limb that was growing in between power lines and cable lines, and the bees decided to also grow around electric lines and cable lines. So the branch needed to be cut to clear the lines, and so we got the call to come rescue them. And we took them down and put them in this wonderful handmade box that somebody made for us in a pouring, one of the wettest, rainiest, stormiest days ever. It was a wonderful civic activity. We had the mayor and the city director and all these city works people and the police and the fire department and the power company and the news and all the friends and all the looky-loos. Bees always draw a crowd. So we're always open to helping people rescue any kind of swarm or hive that may need to be removed. Here's another one. We got this call for this beautiful comb that was built naturally by a colony that simply decided to build their comb on the eaves of this barn during one of our nice, long, warm Southern Oregon summers. This bee chose this spot because it has about 5 or 6 or more sister swarms in that same wall. And so they've been building into that wall for years and years. And so we knew this was a really strong, beautiful colony. We got the call late in the season, so we decided to build an insulated box around it and gave them a chance to overwinter and be protected. So we don't always remove the comb. Sometimes we help them stay right where they are. Here's this example of something we did have to move. This is a colony that is about as big as I am tall. After extracting this colony, I dreamt that the bees were a big quilt and they tucked me up and I slept under a quilt of bees that night. This was a 2-day job. We had to get them out of this abandoned building by the landowner wanted them out, and so we cut open into that old drywall and discovered this just huge and gorgeous colony. The beautiful thing about we did remove this colony and it is now living with the gentleman to the right. The hive is named Mam Goose, last I heard, still going strong. The reason why we love extractions is because this is a genetic that has gone without treatment for sometimes 15 or 20 years sometimes. So it's very important to try to preserve these genetics when we can. The extraction process is best left to people who are very experienced or a group of really plucky people that just want to see the process through. It's the biggest challenge I find in beekeeping, but is absolutely an adventure every single time. The coolest thing about this particular hive is we went to collect them in the evening, and they were divided into a few boxes because, as you can see, it was so large we couldn't really fit it into any one box. So we decided to sit with the bees for a little while, which turned into a long while. And as I was listening to them in the darkness of this beautiful abandoned building, I was able to hear the individual conversations from different sections of the colony. I could hear where the queen was. I could hear little conversations or complaining or busy storytelling. Sometimes it sounded like the blues or country and western or East Indian music. Sometimes it sounded like children talking downstairs. And I really got lost in the soundscape of the beehive. And if you ever get a chance to sit that close in that open way with the bees, I guarantee it will be a moving experience. We also sometimes will move an entire humongous 1-ton log. This picture on the upper left is me hugging this log in winter. It was such a beautiful locust tree full of bees. This hive was awesome, and we moved it with a forklift and trailers and tons of guys and put it there in a hole in the back. But we wanted to preserve the entire body of the bee within that log. And in the lower left picture, you see a 300-pound log being moved by hand by our team and also planted in that same apiary. This is another job that I've only had to do once, but this careless beekeeper had gotten paid to go into the almonds. And the almonds is an industry that brings 90% of the country's bees to the almonds for a short period in February to pollinate almonds. Almonds can only be pollinated by honeybees. So people bring their bees. They get like 200 to 300 per hive to leave the bees there for a couple weeks. This guy had 300 hives. And after the almonds, he didn't have any more pollination contracts. So he drove north of the border of California and dropped his bees along Bear Creek on the side of Bear Mountain. And you can guess what happened next. He didn't have, since he was illegally on this land, also illegally not keeping his bees fed, and he put them in an area. He didn't mark any of his hives, so it was really hard to get a hold of him, and he put it in an area where there were other beekeepers. The other beekeepers, also many beekeepers in the area, reported their hives being killed by robbing bees, which were undoubtedly from these colonies that had little to no honey in them by the time I got there. And the bears got to his bees and killed about half of them, and we were able to get the other half all cleaned up for this beekeeper. And right when we were leaving, we discovered a beautiful little clump of bees that absconded like refugees from this horrible situation, and we helped nurse them through the winter with much love, but they couldn't make it. But so sometimes you do crazy operations like this when you're a beekeeper. We also teach Bee Club, which is to help children see about this beautiful relationship. And children are some of the best beekeepers, are always helpful to have around, especially if you're reaching a grandparent age, because they have great eyes and they can see the eggs down in the cell. We also like to really work with, in the left picture there, we're actually providing pollination services at a farm, which was a great opportunity for us to practice meditation with the bees when we did our work up on those in that apiary. This is Bee Club, and in the upper left picture, you see that white sheet, and if you follow the trunk of that tree, it has a clay pot on top. This is the willow tree that we moved with Bee Club's help, and when we put it in the ground, it continued to grow and sprout all those branches. So it had a living hive inside a living tree. beautiful experience. So this is Bee Club. We also work on gardens and landscape, organic farming, and spend a lot of time just having a nice time together, learning about bees, meditating, praying and offering, doing gardening and other basically forage creation volunteer jobs. This I didn't realize that bees would take me around the world, and this is one of the first trips I got to take. Had the rare and wonderful opportunity to travel with Les Crowder to Jamaica. I learned a lot about top bar beekeeping, and up in the middle picture at the top is me showing some Jamaican friends how I speak to bees and how I talk to bees, and they were very warm and receptive. It was very natural. I think everybody really enjoyed that perspective. I got to teach some kids when I was in Jamaica, and that was a lot of fun as well. I learned about equatorial beekeeping, beekeeping in developing world, the dependency and on Western beekeeping teachers, the colonial model as applied to beekeeping, as well as the difference between how to care for Langstroth and top bar. And as a result, I've heavily modified our top bars to be more like Langstroths. And when you take the evolutionary beekeeping classes, we will be mentioning a lot of that. But I learned a lot. It was a wonderful experience to learn about those kinds of bees. I even saw a feral colony out in nature. That was fun. I also got to go to Peru, where I worked with a little school and a beekeeper there named Melissae, and we taught kids about beekeeping, and I got to practice high mountain beekeeping when I was there. They were very successful, actually. Peru, really, where I was, really had a lot of clean agriculture, so they had a lot of wonderful surviving native bees, and really enjoyed their bees more than Apis mellifera. I didn't find a lot of use for Apis mellifera, but it's also just a great science project. And that's what we were doing, was using the bees as a science lesson in the school there. I've also gone to Findhorn several times and taught. Findhorn is an intentional community in north of Scotland that likes to work with concepts about world peace and intentional community, and they do a lot of praying. I believe in animal and earth communication, and I am in the picture in the bottom left, blessing the apiary there with milk and honey. One of my last trips of that season was going to Turkey, and here I am at probably the seat of the beekeeping of the region at a Neolithic site called Çatalhöyük. I'm holding my arms up in the symbol of the protection goddess because that's where this image sprang from, and I thought it'd be fun to bring it alive for a minute. But when we were standing there, I looked with my telephoto lens into the hills, and I spied this tiny apiary. Of course, I spied the apiary. So we went in that picture, just to describe what you're seeing. The cylindrical hive on the left in that picture is actually a native Turkish hive. We didn't get to inspect that day, but we made friends with the beekeeper. We're definitely going back, and you can see his daughters giving us a beautiful lunch spontaneously when we showed up unannounced and asked, "Are you beekeepers?" And they said, "Yes, are you?" And we had a great afternoon. I was in Turkey to present at the Apamonia, which is the World Beekeeping Congress. Was a great honor. This event attracted around 10 to 15,000 people from all over the world. I got to meet and hear speakers from everywhere, from Africa and China and all over the Middle East and Europe and America and South America, everywhere. And it was quite an honor to bring the concept of sacred beekeeping to the world stage. After I did my speaking, I went to the town of Selçuk, which is on the coast facing Greece. And this is a town next to a great ruin of Ephesus. I mention Ephesus because it was a city founded by Amazons at the dawning of civilization and became one of this beautiful city. And they were protected by the goddess Artemis. who was a bee goddess, which I'll mention in a minute. They had one of the world's greatest libraries. This is their library, Celsus, again pointing to bee cultures as really respecting, honoring, and building educational systems and language. And here are two images of the bee goddess, Artemis, from her a museum there right next to the Temple of Artemis. You can see the bees on the side of her skirt. So this was a uh, very seminal moment in the history of the world when this goddess was at her peak. And her title is Queen Bee, and her priestesses were called the Melissae, or honeybee. Now, Artemis isn't the only goddess. In fact, the bee goddess is all over the place in ancient and even more modern history. You can learn more extensively about the sacred bee history and lineage by checking out our Sacred Beekeeping Intensive online course. Up in the upper left, you see Deborah. She was one of the only women, she is the only woman in the Judaic judges. All the rest are men. She was a beekeeper, a healer, and a warrior. And these are all symbols that you're going to see around the world when talking about bee priestesses or bee goddesses. I feel like Deborah was a derivative of earlier goddess forms, perhaps coming even as far back as the Minoans, which is the picture in the upper middle. My favorite culture to study right now about the bee. And they, I believe, transported bees and information all around the world through their extensive maritime trading routes. One of the places that they may have gone is into the Nordic lands, either overland or overseas. Somebody went there because Freya is another bee goddess. She's a healer, she's a warrior, and she is the one who supposedly made mead when somebody cried and tears of honey was dripped into the cauldron and created mead. On the bottom left are some very bee-ish columns in the Vatican. The bee imagery is super heavy duty all the way through Catholicism. In the middle, you see a very old goddess named Brahmari Devi, who changed her body to a bazillion bees to get rid of all the demons that were trying to attack the sanctity of the divine feminine on earth. Isn't that a wonderful symbol to think about and uncover for today? An ancient culture we've already alluded to is the Egyptians. And then on the far right is a later Greek, perhaps Roman priestess called the Pythia, who was a prophetess or an oracle. She took in the fumes from the Pythia, the snake that is decaying in the crack beneath her, and she is holding the laurel, which is an allusion to the herbs that they would nibble to help enhance their trances. So the fumes from the earth, the psychotropic medicines, and the training of these Melissa gave them incredible powers of prophecy, and they were very important to the civilization at the time. Doesn't stop there. Up here is Neith. She's a very ancient goddess of Egypt. In fact, was one of the original goddesses, the mother goddess of Egypt. She is a self-manifesting goddess, meaning that she creates life from herself through parthenogenesis, meaning no need for seed. She can produce life just from her own essence. This is very common with bee goddesses, that they are associated with the first mother goddess of many cultures. And Neith is the one, and under her name was where the first college in ancient Egypt, called the House of the Bee, was formed. It maintained power for women long after patriarchy ground down the feminine power holders, and was, just like the priestesses at Delphi, very respected in the community for a long time. The concept of first mother also goes to the concept of the birth of humans. The Kalahari Bushmen in the upper right have an origin story of a grasshopper that is carrying a bee across the water, and instead of thanking the cricket, it stings the cricket. And so forever on, and the eggs from that sting made human beings. And forever on, the bee took a vow never to kill anything and only to give sweetness to the people. Below that is a painting from Neolithic, potentially, Australia, very ancient cave painting that's showing beehives. On the bottom right says South American bee god. And the one next to it, showing a woman climbing ropes collecting honey, has a great, interesting, and complex story to it, but that's from 10,000 years ago, depicting honey gathering in ancient Spain. The picture that is sort of black and white, depicting a woman in stone standing on lions. You're going to often see lions depicted with bee goddesses. She is holding in her hand some ropes that nobody seems to know what they are. But if we follow the story of the path of pollen and the ancient beekeeping practices, the priestess practices, we might think that they belong to a weaver. They are certainly the progenitor of the Ankh, which is the symbol of life for the Egyptians. And she has on her head a beehive hat, which you can see later on the top of the Pope's head. This is a goddess, an early goddess, a bee goddess in ancient Sumeria. The one on the left is a very, very old Neolithic or pre-Neolithic painting from Spain, and is showing a dancing, ecstatic bee goddess. So before we close, let's just have a little moment to talk about what's going on with the bees, so you know what's going on with the bees. You've all seen this kind of picture. This is life with bees and life without bees. The plants on the right are wind pollinated. The plants on the left are pollinated by Apis mellifera, most likely, because they're mostly European crops. If we lose the bees, we lose all of that. But if we lose the native species, we can lose even more than we even know. This is one of my favorite pollinators, named the hummingbird moth, and it's a beautiful species. It's not threatened that I know of at this time, but it shows that we have a wide range of other pollinator species to think about, including, if you can believe it, ocean floor pollinators. They just discovered that in like 2010. So with these recent discoveries and how little we truly know about superorganism Gaia theory or symbiosis as solution, I feel like we're sitting around on Facebook with the couch on fire. So we really need to look at what's truly going on. At least we'll know, and maybe we can work towards solution. So the shadow side of the greater beekeeping culture and why we advocate an evolutionary approach to beekeeping is that the apicultural industry in and of itself is a toxic soup with devastating losses. We touched on the migratory practices, but one of the things, some other things about the migratory or the commercial beekeeping is that they will replace 100% of their queens annually. So they only work with 1-year-old queens. They're doing this from a bottlenecking number of genetic sources, and it has been estimated that there are 6 bee sources across the entire country at this time because of the way the commercial industry is breeding these bees. So this bottlenecking genetic, along with the fact that most, if not 95% of beekeepers in our country use in-hive chemicals. And if you remember when I was talking about the pollen that has to be broken down with fermentation process, the in-hive chemicals can interrupt that, leading bees to not be able to uptake their nutrition, amongst other issues. So that is what I mean by toxic soup. Also, the migratory practices expose bees to one agricultural pesticide after another. They expose them to traveling on highways and being exposed to the kinds of chemicals that are released in exhaust and so forth. So with the requeening, the general rule right now in our statistics is around 40% loss annually of bees. But we are reproducing them at such a high rate that I don't believe that we're actually adequately doing the math. If the beekeeper requeens his hive, that is a loss because the beehive before died when they killed the queen. So therefore, if we're sustaining a 40% loss of bees we count, and then we include the bees that are requeened, we're looking more at 140% loss of bees in America. And that means that they are being bred at a super crazy rate. And that's the only reason why we haven't seen or heard about more beekeeping losses. It's because we're replacing them. So agriculture itself, I believe agriculture is chemotherapy in our country. Um, I believe that because it needs chemicals to live, you would call it a chemically addicted industry. The industry itself is financially motivated, so the science cannot be trusted. And it is also corrupt because all the people that take care of the policy and the policing within agriculture generally jump from one job into a corporate job, for example, Monsanto or Bayer, back to the Environmental Protection Agency, and then back into the agricultural world or a commercial part of the agricultural world. And so there's a insular group of people that are um, financially motivated, and therefore this industry is corrupt. And I think you could say all of those things about apiculture as well. So we really need people to start thinking about morals and ethics and big picture thinkers, meta thinkers, seven generation thinkers, and not just financially motivated thinkers. A lot of times the financial motivation is driving science, but the worst thing that limits science is the concept of reductionist science. This is where we're seeking a singular answer to a singular problem. And this fails bees because bees are a superorganism within a superorganism within the superorganism of Gaia, and a micro solution or a chemical solution cannot solve a meta or macro problem. Other things that are affecting the bees and all pollinators, of course, is climate change, which leads to reduced forage, increased weather-related fires, floods, and so forth. The reduced forage creates reduced diversity in gene pools, reduced diversity in plant and animal species, and all of these factors contribute not only to honeybee loss, but to other types of pollinator loss. But there is good news. I believe that culture is changing. We see this with food choices. We see people from the East Coast to the West Coast choosing organic food. They're seeing that what goes into the soil goes into their bodies, and this is beginning to show an embodied connection to Mother Earth. It's an easy jump to the Gaia principle. And let's take the words of this great man to serious effect at this time, that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And that is why we're trying to do things a little bit differently in our program, to look at it in a new way, to stretch the boundaries, to not use chemical solution to try to cure a problem that may be chemical in origin, just to state one example. And of course, we all know that the world is in our hands. The time is now, and it is time to make a change. And we can start by trying to get as chemically free as we possibly can, with the goal of 100% chemically free. We are the transitional generation, we are the infants, and we are the ancestors. Even though we feel like we're at the precipice of Armageddon, we also have people coming along behind us. And let's keep working to make this planet healthy for all beings, animals, pollinators alike. One of the best way we can do this, not only to help heal hearts, but to feed the planet, is to provide lots of diverse organic forage. Find out what grows in your area and grow more of it. Make sure you work on your soil as well. If you don't have a compost started, maybe you can start one. If you live in the city, maybe you can find a program that collects compost, or find a place where once a week you go to a special place on the edge of the wastelands, on the edge of the city, and you start making soil. The soil is being depleted because we're not returning nutrients to the soil. So let's each take it upon ourselves to keep those nutrients in the soil where they belong. While we're at it, let's save seeds. Keeping our seed sources diverse and safe from cross-contamination from GMOs and pollution is a great way to make sure that we have good, healthy, diverse seeds going into the future. Diverse seeds will decrease chance of crop loss due to pests or diseases. And if you collect seeds, go ahead and grow some seeds and share them with your neighbors, because nobody will become a faster bee lover than somebody who loves plants. And that's a great place to start. Remember, we're working for all pollinators, not just the bees. And don't cut down those weeds, because sometimes pollinators need those plants. This is a monarch butterfly whose whose species depends on that beautiful pink flower there, which is called the milkweed, considered quite a nuisance for some people. It often grows in ditches and disturbed land, which is most likely to be sprayed. So if you can grow some in a no spray zone, you can help keep this beautiful species going. You can also make native bee habitat. This is a cute little habitat made in an old bookshelf. If you would like to do something like this hopefully will grow lots of species, provide habitat for lots of species of pollinators. But leaving parts of your ground undisturbed, especially over winter, will keep bees thriving over the winter, and making sure there's pieces of wildland and untrammeled ground in your garden so that some bees like to dig in to where they birth their young, or live in raspberry canes or rose canes that are dead. The individual species of bees can live in there. So go ahead and leave your garden a little messy, because ultimately the world will be more beautiful if you do so. And provide drinking water for the bees. So there's lots of things that we can do to help bees, promote bees, protect bees, and share bees. Thanks for sharing this time with me. If you want to know more about our program, check out collegeofthemelissa.com. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to write Laura Ferguson, abc@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.